Welcome to another session of Just Three Workplace Gurus, a podcast about the real world of work. I'm Mike,
I'm Amy.
I'm Vivian.
and today we're going to talk about something fairly relevant. We just discovered that this month is National Bullying Awareness Month, and we wanted to talk a little bit about bullying in the workplace, that experience, and how you might deal with it as the person bullied. We have invited a guest to join us today. My good friend Samantha Rembo, who is a former colleague and friend, is joining us to help us sort through some of this. Samantha is an HR professional with years of experience in employee engagement and experience, learning and development, recruiting, and is now a coach and a consultant. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you so much. Appreciate being here.
Glad to have you. This is a little darker a session than I think we've ever done. Pardon the expression, because Vivian's a little dark over there in her camera.
Symbolic.
Yeah, symbolic. But I think it's an important one, and the reason that I've wanted to talk about this particular topic for quite a while is that I had an experience of bullying not that many years ago in my career, and I tried to write about it. I have written some articles on LinkedIn over the years, and I never really got it the way I wanted it to be. In the end, it always sort of sounded like whining, I think. And so the goal of today, I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to write it. I'm going to talk about it because now I have this new forum to do so and friends to join me. So that isn't just me sitting here telling you all the tragedies of my life. So I thought we would start with a little bit of definition um, of both how the bullying can present itself and also the feelings that it can elicit in the individual. To me, I think bullying can, in the workplace in particular, I mean, we've all been, let me take a step back. I think we've all been bullied at some point in our lives, whether it was on the playground, in the classroom,
Definitely.
whatever. And that's somewhat a part of being a child, as bad as it is. Having it happen in the workplace, I think, is often a surprise to people. It certainly was to me. But I think it can come across as demeaning or belittling behavior, um, uh, ridicule, uh, joking that is inappropriate. There are quite a few ways that it can come across. One of them is gaslighting. And we talked about defining gaslighting. First of all, gaslighting comes from a film. There was a
Great film.
1940
Yep.
production and a 1944 production. The 1944 production is Charles Boyer, Ingrid Bergman, and Angela Lansbury. If you haven't seen the film, watch it. It's really good. And the term gaslighting comes from the fact that Charles Boyer is trying to make his wife think she's crazy, and he turns the gas on and off in their home or up and down, and she thinks there's something going on, and it's him physically manipulating the gas. And so the film is called Gaslight, and that has turned into this term of gaslighting, which is specifically kind of the problem that I had, which I'll get to in a few minutes. Um, how do we think that manifests itself in the person who's being bullied?
We'll turn it to
Anybody can jump in.
Samantha.
Are you, you're
Yeah,
talking
go ahead.
about gaslighting
Or
specifically?
just any behavior, any bullying behavior towards the person who's being bullied.
Well, before we jump into that, I just want to define workplace bullying just to get us grounded. I know you did a little bit of gaslighting, but also just kind of like step back just for 1 second and define, just to set some context, right? Because it comes in a lot of different forms. And so, workplace bullying refers to repeated, unreasonable actions of individuals or a group directed towards an employee or group of employees, which is intended to intimidate and create a risk to the health and safety of the employees. Workplace bullying often involves an abuse or misuse of power. So, different ways that this can show up: efforts to undermine, do harm by threatening a person's work status, self confidence, which is really where I see it come out a lot, and ability to perform a job. And so the gaslighting element is definitely a component, I think, of how leaders, some leaders try to misuse their power in a way, and by really impacting somebody's self-confidence. But this happens over time, and I also think gaslighting happens over time, right? It's not just one instance or one incident that happens. The repeatability of it, I think, has both short and long-term effects.
It's
Well, there's a manipulation of the person that is kind of methodical and long-standing that sort of eats away at you.
Yeah, I think it's manipulation. I think it is abuse of power. And would you also put harassment in that category too? Because it feels like that's another way it can show up. And harassing can mean a lot of things too: being mean, being unreasonable, being like forcing your ideas or your way, your will on others or one in particular. And it's some like way of squashing somebody or somebody's, right? And anyway, and it feels terrible to be on the receiving end.
Yeah. And the harassment part, so there was some research I was doing prior to this, and there was a 2023 workplace harassment and employee misconduct insights. And the stats are just really mind blowing that 52% of employees have experienced or witnessed harassment in the
That's so
workplace.
high.
Wow.
Mm.
Oh, that's really
Yeah.
disturbing. Wow.
Yes. Right. And 71% of workplace bullies act alone, but 29% bully in a group. And when you have that workplace environment, and I think that's where it comes of either you're feeling it or you're observing it, is that people find it easy to pile on in a
Right.
situation. And so sometimes it's not just your boss per se, right? We think a lot of times bullying, oh, you're being bullied by your boss, but that might not always be the case.
Wow.
It could be a boss, it could be coworkers, it could be partners, it could be a variety of different people, which just makes it so much bigger as well.
Very interesting. Wow.
Yeah, those are really interesting statistics. I'll tell my story, and I think that'll help generate a little conversation. This was a few years ago, and I was working at a tech company, relatively small. And when I applied for the position, I had I had feelings that maybe this was a bad choice. And I remember getting on the phone and talking to the hiring manager and saying, I have a couple of offers and I need a little bit more time. And the response that they gave me was, well, you're the only person I have. Like, I need you. Like, it was this moment of neediness. And when I started, that was how it came across. Oh my God, you're a savior. You're going to do everything for us. You're going to be awesome. And so it was building me up and then sort of a gradual tearing down. And I remember there were a couple of instances. One where they wanted to participate in a design process. They were going on vacation, and they said, I want to be part of this. I'm going to help make these choices. And so I waited 2 weeks for this person to come back from vacation, and then sat down with them and presented everything. And they said to me, "Why are you coming to me with this? Why are you presenting this? This is your job, not my job. I can't be doing your job for you."
Oh,
And so I sat there waiting for 2 weeks to do what was a very simple thing. We were essentially choosing fabrics for conference room chairs. Like, this is not earth-shaking stuff.
right.
Uh, and it was that kind of thing all the time, and constantly commenting about how I should present myself, what I should say. Every time I went into a meeting with executives, prepping me for it. You need to say this. You need to look this way. You need to present this to the leadership team. And over time, it really did eat away at my self esteem, particularly as it aligns with the job. And I remember saying in a review, I have a feeling that I'm not as good at this job as I thought I was before I came here.
Ooh.
I said that out loud, and the response was, well, I hope I didn't have anything to do with that.
Oh, wow.
which I should have responded to. Like looking, all of this comes back to the fact that I never really stood up for myself. I was afraid of this person because aside from everything else, they were just tough, like scary tough,
Hmm.
uh, and just kind of frightened everybody. I wasn't the only person who had this problem. There were many people who were challenged.
Mike, though,
Um,
what would have been the consequences if you did stand up to them? Like, what were you truly afraid of?
Oh,
that's such a great question,
that's a
Amy,
great
and I
question.
ask myself that all the time. And think I don't think that they were significant, but I think I was afraid of losing my job,
Ah,
which I probably needed to have happen.
but at the
Let's
time
face
you
It's
don't know
funny when
that.
you look at it
it.
in the past, right? Like,
Yeah,
you could.
Right.
yeah, exactly. Looking back, I see that this was the challenge that I had in trying to write the article. Was I always felt like I was whining about what this person did to me instead of talking about how I responded to it, which is why this is such an awesome question. Because I
Yeah.
don't know why I didn't respond differently, why I didn't just, lay it all out there.
Well, I think that's
Um,
part, if I can interrupt for a second, it's part of what you
no,
said,
sure.
Samantha, which is, you get intimidated. Your
Mhm.
self-esteem starts to go down. I long ago I was in a very unhealthy relationship, like outside of work. And you don't it's like a frog that's being boiled alive in water. Like
Oh,
you
God.
don't it's a terrible image. I'm a vegan too. Sorry, frogs. Anyway, but you don't realize it's happening at the time, and it's cumulative. So, Samantha, I really love that you called that out. That it is over time, and you're because your self confidence erodes. You don't like you can look back and say, "Oh my God, who was I?" But you were somebody who was a victim, right?
And oftentimes, I don't think you have anybody else there to tell you that you're okay,
Yeah,
because many people are suffering the same bullying behavior, and so everybody feels the same way, and they don't know how to get out of it,
yeah.
or may not even be aware that it's happening to them. As you said, it's cumulative, so it just gets worse and worse.
So when did you realize this is happening to me? This isn't normal. What are some things that you tried to do?
I had a really funny conversation with a coworker who was leaving the company, who was at my level. We were out to lunch, and I sat outside of this person's office in a cubicle that faced away from them. And I said to this friend, I have this feeling all the time that they are going to come out of their office and smack me on the back of the head.
Oh, my.
Oh wow! Oh my goodness. Okay.
And my friend said to me, "Do you know how demented that is? Like, do you know how bad?
Reality
Like,
check.
you really got to get away from this situation."
Yeah.
And I think that was the first time I really realized that I wasn't the only person in this problem and that everybody else could see what was happening to me more clearly than I could.
Yeah.
And that started the process of leaving the company. And so I think I didn't know. I think I just assumed I wasn't as good at my job as I thought I was, to be
And you
really
and you
honest.
you took on the burden.
I
Interesting.
did. And it did, I will say this, it completely changed how I perceived myself going forward. I never, while I might have taken, I mean, we all work, some of us work in tech. It's crazy out there. And often you do find yourself in what I would call immature situations. I don't accept that anymore. I knew from then on, I actually do know how to do this job. And if you don't like how I'm doing it, that's probably your challenge, not mine. So I'm going to keep doing what I do as well as I do and hope that it works out. And that's been reaffirmed in many ways over the years. So I take that as a positive. That doesn't mean that I would call it a level of arrogance. I don't think that. I'm certainly
Sounds like you
capable of
got your
making mistakes.
confidence back, and you found
Yes,
your sea legs again. You know.
the right at the right level.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think that's very true. Funny story about the tail end of that. I did leave the job, and I wasn't there very long. And the person emailed me the morning of my last day and asked me to if I wanted to go to lunch. And I thought, well, that'll be a night, sure. Why would I say no to that? So I went to the office later in the morning and gave my laptop back and got my check and waited an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And they just were busy. They kept saying they were busy. It was going to take a little
They
longer. It was going
made
to
you
take a little
wait
longer.
for them? Like it was an
Yes.
hour after the lunch? Wow,
Oh,
that's so
Yes.
rude.
So I went in their office to say, hey, maybe we can schedule this for another time. I know you're busy, and they took me out into the public space in front of the CEO's office, all of the various groups that sat there, maybe 50 people, and very loudly said, we are going to have to get together and talk about what went wrong here,
Yeah.
and essentially, the last nail in the coffin.
That was the verbal smack to the head. Right.
Yes,
Wow.
I went down to get in the car and started the car, and Pharrell's Happy Song was playing on the radio, which could not have been more poetic. And I laughed probably for a good 10 or 15 minutes as I was driving. I was so happy to be over that.
I'm for
And
real.
I'm not kidding you. I still hear that song and it
You think
makes
of
me
that.
giggle. Like I can feel that feeling of release.
Yeah.
And I particularly love that song now just because of that experience.
Yeah.
So, to some degree, there's a happy ending to it.
Yeah, but
But
I'm sorry you
I
had to
often
go
think,
through
wow,
this. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, and
for
and
you.
why did I let it? Why did? I mean, I'm not blaming myself, but on some level, I think, yeah, I had to learn from that so that I wouldn't let it happen again.
But now you're
What did
carrying
you
it
learn from
for others.
Thanks.
that? Yeah.
Say again,
What
Cindy.
are you what did you learn? What were now in time to reflect and hindsight, of course, right? All the things we'd want to say in the moment, but what were some of your real learnings and takeaways from that experience?
I think there are only a couple. One is that I do have to stand up for myself, regardless of the person. I think we have a tendency to always think that people in leadership are better than we are, or cooler than we are, or more thoughtful, or I don't know what. And I've learned over the years as I've moved up and gotten to know leaders better, that they're just as challenged as all the rest of us. They have good days and bad days, and they have confidence days and no confidence days, and
I mean, they're
uh,
human. Yes.
yeah, yes, and I think we forget that, or at least when you're starting out in a career, you forget that.
Yeah.
And so I think I learned that. I certainly learned to stand up for myself. I certainly learned that if I was in a bad situation, I probably needed to get out of it.
Yeah.
Amy, you may remember I did a panel discussion a few years ago where we were talking about life in the high tech environment and what that was like. And towards the end of the panel discussion, I had talked about how challenging it was to work with leadership in that particular company way back, and that they didn't always listen. And this participant in the audience raised their hand and said, "Well, what did you ultimately do to fix that?" And I said, "Oh, I quit." And everybody in the room laughed. But sometimes that is the solution to the
Sometimes
problem.
it is.
I'm going somewhere else,
Yeah.
And so I think a little perspective on my career, what I was capable of doing. There are times when the economy's not great and you can't quit a job because there isn't
You need the
something else
job.
out
Yeah.
there. Right. But I think knowing when it's time to, you know,
Well, that
quit
Fold
and move on.
them. Isn't there a song like when it time to fold them?
Know when to
Yeah.
hold
What?
them,
Yeah.
know when to hold
Yeah,
them.
Exactly.
thank you.
Kenny Rogers.
Yeah.
I'd be
Kenny Rogers.
curious
Great.
to hear from you, Samantha. Like two things:
Yeah.
what bullying can feel like. Like you gave a nice description of what it is, but like some sort of
Mhm.
like signals inside, right? Sometimes it's your gut saying this doesn't feel right. And then what are the recourses for somebody? I mean, quitting is the ultimate recourse. Like I'm out, bye, I gotta go.
Yeah. Not
Yeah,
ideal,
but like
of
within an
course.
organization, small or big, right? Because this can happen, in a two-man shop too. So I'd be just curious
Yep.
from an HR perspective, like what should you be on the lookout for? How do you recognize this, and then what do you do about it?
Yeah. And sometimes you don't, as Mike mentioned, you don't feel it happening to yourself in the moment, but then you start seeing it in other people, or you see how that person treats
Mm,
others. And so it's really the core of every successful relationship. And in Mike's case, you came into an organization already with some trepidation and concerns, but it really is a lot around communication and expectation setting. And so, if there is not good communication or you're not on the same page of what's expected, when you don't deliver, it becomes very surprising, right? Or in a situation where somebody's feeling, the feeling is everybody has different emotions that go with it, but sometimes it's embarrassment or shame or self-criticism or imposter syndrome starts making its way to think,
Right.
do I belong here? Am I capable of doing anything right?
Yeah.
And you start questioning yourself.
Yeah.
And the second you start questioning yourself, or someone makes you feel bad,
Yeah.
or somebody does it, which is, it's never great, but in a group setting. And that will destroy not only you, but the people
Yeah.
around you. And that puts fear into other people to say, well, if I say something, am I going to get that same reaction? And it really is observing behaviors and seeing how people react, respond, their level of engagement. And for me, and I've done a lot of work in employee engagement, is, happy employees and is somebody passionate and excited about what they're doing and who they're working with. People don't come, some people come every day because of the work they're doing, but really it's about who they get to work with. And that's what
Yeah.
keeps people as well, is the people.
Very much.
And and recourse is hard. You mentioned also a few reasons why somebody would be afraid. So, the feelings and emotions, some people have trauma associated with it. They were bullied as a kid, and then all of a sudden, those same symptoms, whether it's a nickname or name calling or a comment or anything, I would, not productive, not helping us move forward towards whatever our goal is as a team, as an organization, whatever it is we're trying to do. And unfortunately, it becomes something that reverses course and it slows down progress. And so people are not as
Right.
open. It really is, there's the dynamic when you're starting in an organization. So even when you're interviewing and assessing, do I want to be there, who are these people, you're interviewing just as much as they're interviewing you. And I think that's even more important these days, with mental health being at the forefront and people
Absolutely.
actually caring or talking about it.
Yeah.
And just understanding what's important to individuals, right? Even little things of, how do you like to be recognized? What are you comfortable with? And it really comes down to leadership and the
Mm.
culture that is set at the organization of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And if you get in a situation where you feel that someone's attacking you or whatever the case may be, or feeling bullied in some way, it's it's trying for yourself to identify, okay, what was the situation that happened? And this is just like a feedback,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
SBI model, if you're familiar with it. It's the situation, the behavior, and the impact. And it's a little bit of reflection to say, okay, what happened? Right? What was the behavior or action that happened? And then what was the impact that it had on me? And being able to at least formulate that or articulate that for yourself starts to prepare you to be able to share that with somebody else. And if you are comfortable having that conversation with your boss or whoever the person is, if somebody is not your boss who's doing it, your manager should be a person that you could be able to go to and
Yeah.
trust and to share the situation.
Yeah.
But it does become tricky when the bully is your boss. So there's
Good.
there's
Very good
different
point. Yeah.
ways to go about that. But, Mike, you mentioned standing up for yourself as a learning that you had. And I'm wondering if you have any examples of what that looks like or what that looked like for you following this situation. Did a future situation come up where then you stood up for yourself, and what that sounded like or looked like?
Uh, yeah, I think one that comes to mind is there have been a couple of instances over the years where I'm at a level now where I tend to be reporting to executive level teams of people. And in all honesty, I do report to one person, but I don't report to one person. I report to all of them. And sometimes you find yourself sort of caught in the middle.
Mm.
And I think standing up and saying, "Hey, I need some clarity here. I need to know who's making the decision and how are we processing this." Uh, you know, and I think adding to that, what my role is, I have been a lot stronger in saying, look, I am a workplace professional. This is what I do for a living. I'm good at it. It stops here. This is the stuff that I do, and from here, it's other people's responsibility. I'm going to stay right here and wait for direction or for participation or whatever you want to call it, depending on how the organization is structured. Um, I've been in situations, for instance, where I just kept doing my work and I didn't necessarily have a lot of support. And it worked. I mean, it was fine for a few years. And then people kind of got tired of me going off and doing what they wanted me to do, but without their participation. And so, eventually that sort of wound down. Um, but I remember coaching a friend who would say to me, it is often about how you come to the table, how you present yourself. And that was a huge bit of learning for me that I have kept with me ever since. And I think very differently about how I walk into a room. I think, for instance, we've talked about this on the podcast a couple times, working on a big project at the company I work at now that is very visible and very much involves the executive suite. And I am the expert in the room on the overall project. They are the experts on their teams. They tell me how much money we have to spend, etc. But this is what I do for a living, and so I found that really successful. It's working better because I know my role, I know what I bring to the table, and I come to the table as that person, which I think is different from what I would have done at one time.
So you
Yeah.
set boundaries, right?
Yes.
And
Yes,
around it and what each person's role is within that, which I think is always a productive work environment.
we joke about this a lot amongst ourselves. I know my friends here, but I also just don't care as much as I used to.
That's another
Oh,
podcast episode.
That's an age
I
thing. Like,
mean,
okay,
yeah,
Yeah, but Samantha,
things evolve, priorities shift
yes,
over time.
yeah,
You have
but
more experience, so you know what you want.
Samantha, you said something that struck my ears when you said, when you're in a situation where you're intimidated, self-esteem goes down. You said this might even be your boss doing. Like, who do you go to? How do you do this? And standing up to anybody. Most of us don't like confrontation, right? And
nope.
the whole idea of bullying or somebody like the balance of powers becomes very lopsided, right? But I still would love to just talk about like what somebody should do if they're feeling bullied. You know, who do they talk to? And if it is their boss or is it HR or do they talk outside the company or, just something's not feeling good or it's causing anxiety, it's causing misery. Nobody wants that.
Yes. So I think, having somebody to be able to talk to and vent to is very important. To be able to hear exactly, say out loud what's going on, the feelings you're feeling, because you definitely, most people want that validation, whether it's a friend saying, yeah, that's it, you're wrong, they're the worst, right? Or, having somebody to just listen and help you talk through how you should go back and approach the situation. And so when it is your manager, and we'll talk about that. I'll focus on that because that is the hardest one to manage through. It's easy for me to say you can't control what people say or do. You can only control how you react to it. And so there's power in how you respond. There's power in how you take in that information and however they're coming at you, you're either responding or matching their level or going higher,
Right.
or being able to sit back and just take it in and listen to what's being said and be able to formulate a response, which is hard in the moment to do.
Of course.
And so being able to, again, figure out what exactly are they doing. And I've had friends who have, I know many people, unfortunately, who have been in really bad situations being bullied by their managers. And it's this feeling of, I could do nothing right. Everything I do is wrong. They tell me to go do this. I do exactly what they say. Something's wrong with it. It's like they're picking apart every single thing, or nothing is good enough. And so there's a part of it in terms of trying to get that person onto a human level as the person and separate the work for a second and actually get to know them as a person. And building a relationship and building trust does take time. And so if you are somebody who is feeling a certain way, being able to communicate back to that manager to say, look, when this situation happens, here's what you did or said, right? Actual facts, not just you're being mean, you're being rude, you're being this, having some actual examples to go with it. And there are a lot of times where a really good leader will listen and take that in as constructive, say, oh my goodness, you hope for the response of, oh my goodness, I never meant for you to feel this way. I am so sorry. That was not my intention. And you try to go in assuming good intent.
Okay, that's a good
But
rule of thumb.
sometimes,
First,
right, which is hard to assume good intent, but if that mindset at least puts you on the positive side of things and not just thinking, this is happening to me, this they're horrible person. I always think that there's something going on in their life, in their world, or something that has happened to them that has made them this way. Not acceptable at all.
yeah,
So first,
But real.
if you are,
That's real. Yeah.
yeah. And if you have the ability to have that conversation with them and to come from a calm place of, hey, I'd like to understand a little bit more this situation. This is what happened. Here's what how you responded. I'm a little confused because these were the directions I was given, or whatever the case
right.
may be. And this is how it made me feel, right? By doing this in front of everybody. Let's say it was a group meeting, which is when a lot of these things happen. People get berated in public.
Mm.
Look, I understand that this is something that I didn't do correctly and I take ownership for that. However, moving forward, I'd really appreciate if there's something that I've done, if you can do it offline. If after the situation, you can come to
Yes.
me directly and we can talk through it. I'd like to understand. I'd like to learn. I'd like to get better and be open to any feedback that there might
I
be.
think that's so valuable because when I think about these types of people who are doing that, a lot of times they don't know that they're doing it. They
Hmm.
maybe they're in a powerful position and they feel the need to do it. Maybe they're narcissistic or what have you, or it's been done to them, and so they think that that's the norm. So I really like the approach that you're talking about because it brings up the fact that like, hey, I'm going to make you aware of how what happened and
Yeah.
this is my take on it. And now they can do what they want to do. If they do it again, then you've got a problem, right? But at least you've given them that chance to fix it.
That's a very
And you're empowered.
yeah.
Mhm.
You were empowered to be the one to say it. It's not that somebody, oh, I tattletaling, right? I mean, it's not like I told and then they had to get feedback that first time. It's, yes, go talk to the person if you can yourself.
And I think sometimes that's where we go wrong is we tend to go and talk to others about it. And then you start to build out a toxic environment
Hmm.
rather than go to the source, talk it through, and see if it can be fixed.
Yeah.
That's a
And
really good point, Amy. You kind of build that camaraderie and it just sort of feeds on itself,
Yes.
just like the bullying has done. And then it almost becomes irreparable.
Yeah.
So let's say you do that, Samantha, and it doesn't go. If it goes well, great. Somebody actually like,
right.
you're putting a mirror up to somebody and informing them, and hopefully that's a growth moment. What if it's not?
Hmm. So if it's not, then you might need some additional help. And so I know it's always scary to go to HR, but there are people, because if this is the start of something, then you want to be early to document as well. You don't want to think, oh, that's no big deal, it won't happen again, then it happens again. And then you get used to it happening.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where I just had seen this quote from Adam Grant, who does a lot of workplace and leadership type things. And he said, if someone regularly mistreats you, Choosing not to be angry doesn't mean you tolerate their behavior. It means you no longer let it surprise you.
Mm.
Lowering your
Mm,
expectations is not about permitting them to be disrespectful, it's about freeing yourself from their emotional grip. We let people take control of us and our emotions. It's the same reason when Mike, I know in previous podcasts, time off was a topic you all talked about and how you
mhm.
don't take time off, and the world will not end if you don't take time off. But it's you're in control of certain things, and so how you respond, how you let it affect you, but it does, and it I see it not only affect people, but then run into the home, right? So they take it home with them, and that. So if at first you don't succeed on your own and you have somebody, whether it's somebody in the business, a mentor, a peer, somebody that knows the
Yeah.
situation or knows the person, that might be another area of opportunity to share, not in the sense of sharing to spread the toxicity, but more from a seeking to understand, is this a me thing? Is this other people
Yeah.
thing? But then really engaging with HR. Now, some people are scared to go to HR because they think they just go back and tell them. But really, the first step is to be able to get some coaching or to understand, are there other things going on in the organization you might not be aware of? There's always a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
So, in going to them, it's starting that process. If it's happened, starting to document and keeping track of the situations, whether it was on a call and after the call. If you're doing one on ones and there gets confusion after, or there's something after they say, oh no, you said this or you didn't do this, start documenting after the one on one calls with the action items and what you discussed and send it. It's the same advice that a manager gets if an employee is not performing.
Ah.
So if you think about it in reverse, kind of the manager's not
Yeah.
performing.
Managing up.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's great.
That's a really good way to frame it, right? Like, hey, you didn't do something. I don't even say wrong. They're not performing, right? They're not doing their job the way they need to, right?
Yep. And if it is something that is within a team environment, you will get to a point where, the facilitation of a discussion or a skip level discussion, or if you do have an annual a survey, pulse surveys, all different ways that they're gauging engagement,
Yeah.
that's also where you have a voice. Now, I'll play the other side. I've been in situations where I've run those surveys and we've received data and people don't want to believe it. So
Mm.
it takes strong leadership and partnership to be able to look at these
Yeah.
objectively, to say, I think we have a problem in an organization and let's dive a little deeper to figure out what it might be or what the cause is.
Yeah.
Because you all mentioned, like, it's not that people do this on purpose per se. Some people, it's their first time being a manager and they never got training or coaching. So they're taking tips and tools from the last person they saw who might have thought, oh, this was the best
Mhm.
way to do things.
And look,
Yes.
I've had situations where things got heated with coworker, and
Mhm.
I've lost my head. I'm not a saint, and I was in a situation once where somebody lost their head, and I just said, you know what? I see you're really upset, but you can't talk to me that way. I can't talk to you that way. There's no place for that here. Let's take a step back. And then there were apologies, and then there were, we worked it through. But that's that. I think that piece of however it comes about. We're going to have a positive
Mhm.
conversation. I am going to list HR. I'm going to first talk to a friend, whatever it is, but is to recognize, hey, something is happening, and I don't have to stay in this situation. However, it's going to work itself out. Like, you know, so that's the tricky part.
I do think,
Definitely.
though, that's the ultimate issue that we're challenged with is when do you know that it's okay to move on, that this is not fixable, and you deserve better than that. I think that's often the part that is the hardest for people,
My
but
my mother
most
would always
necessary.
say, follow your gut. If you're waking
Yeah,
up unhappy and you're
yeah.
dreading going to see that person or those people, and it's just feeling toxic, I think, Samantha, you said something. I also look in what's triggering me. Like, am I bringing my past into this situation, or
Yeah.
am I really in a
Yeah.
bad situation? Because sometimes your own experiences can put a
The ability
painful
to
lens.
step back and really take a look at your situation, I
Yeah,
think is hard for most of us.
up, totally.
Um, it's funny when Samantha and I worked together, we became pretty good friends and we talked often, and I think we were a sounding board for each other. And I hope most people have that in the workplace. Somebody that they can. I've made a lot of friends with HR people over the years, so I'll say that, which is not a bad thing.
That's a safe zone.
But yeah, it is. It is.
Well,
But I think that's really helpful, and I don't mean that from a professional perspective. It's not like Samantha was giving me all kinds of professional advice. I just think we were connecting with each other and sharing information, and giving each other a safe place to say this is a challenge and I'm not sure how to deal with it. I think we all have to find that in the workplace, people that we can go to and
Mhm.
talk to.
oh, absolutely.
And and people who have influence, right? So I also observed a lot
Mhm.
at our previous place, other places I've been, and I have a hard time keeping my mouth shut. So, you see something, say something. That's the
Yeah.
thing they always say, right? See something, say something. And in London, it's sorted after. So, words have impact, actions have
Mm,
consequences.
Mm,
And so it is one of those things where I see something, I will either, if I observe it happening, I will pull the leader aside after and have a conversation. And you want to be not only looking out, it happens to you, but being aware of when it happens to others and having a voice. It is just as important for you to speak up when you see it happening because it is harder for the person who is in it
yeah,
to speak up. And so, if there's some influence that you have in that space to be able to pull that person aside or to be able to go to that employee and say, hey, I saw what just happened,
mm,
right? I hear you. I see you. This is not
yeah,
okay. And together we're going to make it better, right? So it's getting an ally. And for yourself, it's knowing if I see something, I'm going to say something and not just keep quiet. Because
that's
the
important.
thing I hear about that the most is regrets,
Yeah,
right? I wish I would have said something.
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And look, we all know that underneath it all, bullies are very insecure, which is one of the reasons they bully,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Or they learned this behavior or whatever. So I think that is so important to stand up for yourself, stand up for others, and disempower the bully, right?
And if you
Agreed.
need a coach, right? I mean, you can ask for a coach who's there to help support. It may not always be, it may just be I need someone as a sounding board. Maybe I am overreacting
Yeah,
sometimes. Maybe I'm not seeing their perspective, right? It may not always be labeled bullying, and bullying is a wider range of things, but sometimes it may just be a communication issue. And how do we better communicate?
yeah,
Right? It's not all like the pendulum swings pretty far in both directions, and you never want to take away from it how anyone's feeling, but to understand the why.
yeah,
Why are you feeling that way? What happened
yeah,
specifically? And those are any questions I would ask anyone coming to me. I would have a lot of questions for them to unpack just to understand how you got there. Because a lot of people will turn and say, how did I get here? And Mike, I know you had said that to yourself. Like, how did I get to this place
Yeah.
that I am accepting of this behavior towards me and towards others?
I think I think that's really important, and it's taught another thing that it's taught me is to ask, I think, different questions in the interview process. When I'm talking to the hiring manager, I really want to get to know them. And quite frankly, if they say to me in that particular instance, "You're all I got. You're the choice," that you got to run like hell the other day. That's not a good.
Right?
That's
A red
not a good
flag's a
situation.
red flag, a red flag's a red flag, right? Like,
Yes,
but
the red
I,
flag, whatever you want to call it, that sense that you really have to establish some ground rules between you and your manager, which I do also with my employees,
yeah,
yeah.
um, because I think it's also important. This was just a quick note I wanted to bring up as you were talking, Sam.
Yeah.
Um, the idea that you may recognize this in other people, you need to recognize it in yourself. You need to spend a little time thinking about how you come to the table with your employees and how you empower them and how you make them feel. and think twice about it. I have a great team. I'm so proud of, uh, and I think about it all the time. One of my employees is on vacation, and she sent me a message today and said, "I hope you're not upset that I took a few days off because we've got all this stuff coming up." And I said, "No, I'm happy that you're taking a few days off, but we got a lot to do when you get back." It's sort of that way of thinking, and I'm honest with them, but I think about how I present myself to them because it is equally important.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
all the
I
way
have,
down the chain, whoever it is on the team. You know,
yeah. I have one more question. I know we're close on time here, but for the three workplace gurus, what do you do to ensure your workplace is free of bullying or create an environment? How do you, as workplace gurus, create an environment, workplace environment that enables inclusivity and no bullying or whatever that might be for you?
Sam, you're asking the three of us. This could turn into another hour.
Okay, well,
Okay. Well, I think
a high
I'll
level,
give it
yeah.
in a word. I think it's communication. And I'm a business owner. I co-founded PBE with my partner, and I think it does come from the top a lot. Which is,
Hmm.
I remember we had a very upset client, and somebody was really like worried to talk to them, and I said, like, they're very unhappy and they're not being very nice about this, and I said, well, then we're going to give them a little more love, right? And I have disarmed so many people just by listening, right? So that's a big one: listening, communicating, and also just kind of setting a tone and letting there be really two-way street communication, and hopefully encouraging people to say, if there's an issue, please come to me, come to us, come to, talk about it. So that's my answer.
I would
Amy.
mirror that, Vivian. And I think the other thing is just living by example. So, or leading by example. So, for me, I think it's important to make sure that it's always inclusive. And if it's not, to your point earlier, to be able to pull somebody aside and say, hey, this is what I heard, and this is not acceptable in this environment.
Yeah.
So, kind of calling it out and not letting it just sit there and kind of fester, because that's when it becomes really, negative. You have to call it out right away.
Yeah. Yeah. And
You,
like,
you both took all the words out of my mouth. Those
Who
were
would have
great,
thought?
really.
there you go. And maybe, Samantha, if you had to give like one piece of advice for managers, business owners, whoever, and then one piece of advice for as an employee, as a team member, how to protect yourself.
So, whew, that's a loaded one, right? How to be a great leader. So I think as a leadership team, it is being open to that communication, listening, right? We always talk two ears, one mouth, getting in there, listening more, understand the dynamic, understand what the culture is, how people feel about it. Do they feel that there is trust? Do they feel comfortable sharing feedback? Is this an environment where people can share what they're thinking or feeling and not have anything come back against them? So it's how do you set up that environment of trust and understanding, and it's by treating everybody as an individual person. Everybody has different needs, everybody learns differently, everybody has different fears, everybody has different triggers, everybody has different ways to communicate. You have to be able to flex along with everybody
Yeah.
else. And so understanding that you're going in to be either a team member or a team leader, that hey, we're here, what is our goal, what is our purpose, why are we here, and you all share in that like north star that you're trying to get to, and that you're all doing it together as a team. There's no individual, right? Go fast, go alone, go as a team, go farther. I know I didn't say that exactly right, but that's the sentiment there. For an individual, it's stand up for
Yeah.
yourself. As I mentioned, you can't control what other people say or do. You control how you react, and that is really hard. But documentation, sound the alarm early. If you're starting to see something or feel something, see something, say something. Not only are you standing up for yourself, but just be aware, observe the environment around
Yeah.
you, observe behaviors and how people respond and react. If somebody is a little more quiet in a meeting all the time, well, that's an opportunity to go and talk to them to understand. Maybe they're afraid to speak up. Maybe
Or they'd have balloons coming up
Or
their
yeah, they're
screen. I'm not
celebrating.
sure how that
I don't know why
happened.
that just happened, but okay. Balloon just appeared on
But
the
it
screen,
does.
but okay.
It's all good. It starts from the top and what's acceptable by leadership. So culture setting to be inclusive, zero
Yeah,
tolerance, right? How you set up the environment, and a lot of that can be discussed in onboarding. Here's what's expected of you as an employee. Here's if something happens. Here's our mental health
yeah.
resources. Here's how you go about it. Because if you have different things, I remember even just having a conversation with, I had real quick story. I had two employees and they were not getting along.
Mm.
And one of them had made a comment to the other. One had just come back, had been gone a couple of years from, took off for maternity leave and then was a stay at home mom for a bit. And she was just coming back into the work environment. And a male employee had made a side comment of, well, you don't even need to work. And it crushed her. But he had no idea that that happened. And so I coached her on how to go back and have the conversation about this specific example. They were both in tears. By the end, he felt so bad.
Wow.
It was not his intent. But if you don't talk about
Yeah,
it, you could sit there stirring and now being mad at the person and thinking, they're so mean, they're rude, whatever they're whatever it might be. Go back and have that conversation. So it's having feedback, giving feedback directly to that person first, between you and them, and trying to solve it that way is, I always think, is the best bet. And if you don't know what to say or do in that situation, get some support and help, but it should be you being the one to communicate.
yeah.
Good point.
And then I'll kind of end on this note. And sometimes you just have a bad apple.
Yes.
And
Oh,
you're not going to get the support you need. And for whatever reason, there's a dysfunctional organization you find yourself in. And then, like,
yes.
just to kind of go full circle, you're like, you know what? I gotta go.
Yeah.
Sometimes you
I
just
gotta
got,
take care of me,
Sometimes.
right? And sometimes it will be the extreme of I've got to get out of here, you know,
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's okay too, right? And
Yeah,
then
you might need to
yes,
leave. That's
yeah,
okay, right?
yeah.
You might need to find something else and start your search. While you're, if you have concerns, obviously, about being, you don't want to be unemployed in the interim. And so it's, how do you start looking while you're still there? And then you have some positive, at least to think there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
There always is.
yes,
Yes,
Yes.
I
And
agree.
there's lessons to be learned from it. What makes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger,
exactly. And
right?
taking your power back, realizing
Yes.
like, oh, it is mine to give. But if it's a bad apple and they're not gonna, I've tried everything. I gotta go. So anyway, speaking of gotta
Well,
go, I think we do gotta go.
yeah,
Yeah.
Samantha, thank you so much. This exceeded all expectations. Great conversation. The
Really
fact that
was.
we ran long is a good indicator of the quality of the conversation we had. I really appreciate everybody's participation today. And for our listeners and viewers, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment.
Yes,
And
and
we'll
join the
be back soon.
conversation. We can keep the conversation going.
Yes, we can.
So,
Yes, we can.
Thanks
Thank
for
you very much.
having me.
all right, thank you
I
for joining
appreciate it.
us. All right,
Bye bye.
Thank you.
take care.